Imagine spending your entire life sacrificing everything for your child, working 3 jobs to put them through college, going without meals so they could have new clothes, and then at 82 years old, broken and in pain, you call them for help, and they tell you you're a burden they can't afford. That's exactly what happened to Eleanor Mitchell in December 2017, when her son Michael told her she was on her own. What Michael didn't know was that his mother had been quietly building a fortune worth over $2 million, and by the time he discovered it, she had already decided he would never see a single penny of it. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Eleanor Mitchell was born in 1935 in rural Kentucky, the youngest of 7 children during the height of the Great Depression. Her father was a coal miner who died of black lung disease when Eleanor was just 12 years old, leaving her mother to raise 7 children on whatever odd jobs she could find. Eleanor learned early that money was scarce and that every penny had to be stretched as far as possible. She watched her mother work herself to the bone, taking in washing, cleaning houses, and even selling vegetables from their small garden just to keep the family fed. Those lessons would shape Eleanor's relationship with money for the rest of her life. When Eleanor was 19, she married James Mitchell, a factory worker at the local automotive plant. They settled in Detroit, where James had secured a steady job on the assembly line. For the first time in her life, Eleanor felt financially secure. They rented a small apartment, and Eleanor took a part-time job at a department store to help save money for their future. In 1958, their son Michael was born, and Eleanor quit her job to become a full-time mother. She poured all her love and attention into raising Michael, determined that he would have opportunities she never had growing up in poverty. James worked double shifts at the factory to provide for his family, often coming home exhausted but always with a smile for his wife and son. Eleanor managed every penny of their household budget with the precision of an accountant, clipping coupons, shopping sales, and never wasting anything. She saved quarters in mason jars and would count them religiously every Sunday night. When Michael was 7 years old, the unthinkable happened. James was killed in an industrial accident at the factory when a piece of heavy machinery malfunctioned. Eleanor was devastated, but she was also terrified about how she would survive as a single mother with no steady income. The factory paid out a settlement of $50,000, which seemed like a fortune to Eleanor at the time. Most widows in her situation would have used that money to pay bills and get by day to day, but Eleanor had learned hard lessons about financial security from her childhood. Instead of spending the settlement money, she made a decision that would change the course of her entire life. She took $20,000 and bought gold coins from a local coin dealer who had advertised in the newspaper. The dealer, an elderly man named Harold Peterson, educated Eleanor about precious metals and how they held their value even when paper money lost its worth. Eleanor got 3 jobs to support herself and Michael without touching the settlement money or selling the gold. She cleaned office buildings at night, worked at a grocery store during the day, and took in alterations and mending work in her spare time. She rarely slept more than 4 hours a night, but she was determined that Michael would never feel the poverty she had experienced as a child. Every week, without fail, Eleanor would take whatever money she had left after paying bills and buy more gold coins. Sometimes it was just 1 coin. Sometimes it was several, but she never missed a week. She stored the coins in safety deposit boxes at 3 different banks across the city, never keeping all her wealth in one place. Michael excelled in school and never knew how hard his mother worked to provide for him. Eleanor made sure he had new clothes for the start of each school year, participated in sports, and attended every school function. When it came time for college, Eleanor had saved enough money to pay for Michael's entire education at the University of Michigan without him needing to take out a single student loan. She was proud of her son and believed that all her sacrifices had been worth it when he graduated with honors and landed a job at a prestigious accounting firm in Chicago. Michael married his college girlfriend Sarah in 1985, and they moved to a wealthy suburb where they started their own family. Eleanor retired from her 3 jobs when she turned 65 and finally felt like she could rest. She had accumulated over 1,500 gold coins by that point, worth well over $1 million, though she never told anyone about her secret wealth. She lived modestly in the same small apartment she had shared with James, driving an old car and shopping at thrift stores, but she was content knowing that she had secured her financial future. As Michael's career advanced and his family grew, Eleanor noticed that his visits became less frequent. Phone calls that used to happen weekly became monthly, then eventually just on holidays and birthdays. When Eleanor would ask Michael about visiting or when she could see her grandchildren, he would always have an excuse about being busy with work or family obligations. Eleanor understood that Michael had his own life to live, but she missed the close relationship they had shared when he was younger. She began to feel like Michael was ashamed of her modest lifestyle and her working-class background. The distance between Eleanor and Michael grew wider when Michael's business ventures began to take off. He started his own consulting firm and became very successful, moving to an even more expensive neighborhood and sending his children to private schools. Eleanor was proud of Michael's success, but she felt increasingly like an outsider in his new world. When Michael's wife Sarah would post photos on social media of their vacations and fancy dinner parties, Eleanor couldn't help but notice that she was never included in their social life. In 2015, Eleanor fell and broke her wrist while shopping for groceries. She called Michael to let him know what had happened, hoping he might offer to help her with errands while her arm healed. Instead, Michael suggested she hire someone to help her, and offered to pay for it, clearly trying to solve the problem with money rather than time or personal attention. Eleanor declined his offer and managed on her own, but the incident made her realize how alone she had become. She started to think more seriously about what would happen to her wealth when she died, and whether Michael truly deserved to inherit it. Eleanor began keeping detailed records of her interactions with Michael, writing down dates when she called him and whether he returned her calls, documenting the times she invited him to visit and his responses, and noting how often he made time to see her. The pattern that emerged was deeply painful for Eleanor to acknowledge. Her son, whom she had sacrificed everything to raise and educate, seemed to view her as an obligation rather than someone he genuinely cared about spending time with. She realized that Michael's offers to pay for things were his way of maintaining distance, while assuaging his guilt about not being more involved in her life. In December 2017, Eleanor's worst fears about aging and being alone became reality when she fell in her apartment and broke her hip. She was unable to get up and lay on the floor for several hours before a neighbor heard her calling for help and called an ambulance. Eleanor underwent surgery to repair her hip and faced a long recovery period. From her hospital bed, she called Michael to tell him what had happened and to ask if he could come visit her. Michael's response was everything Eleanor had come to expect from him over the years, and everything she had dreaded hearing. Michael told Eleanor that he was sorry about her accident, but he was in the middle of an important business deal and couldn't get away from Chicago. He suggested that Eleanor might want to consider moving to an assisted living facility, where she would have help available if something like this happened again. When Eleanor expressed that she wanted to return to her own apartment and maintain her independence, Michael became frustrated and told her that she needed to be realistic about her limitations. He said that he couldn't be responsible for checking on her all the time, and that she needed to accept help from professionals. The conversation that followed would be the last real discussion Eleanor and Michael would ever have. Eleanor asked Michael if he could at least visit her once she was released from the hospital, explaining that she was scared and lonely and just needed to see her son. Michael's response was cold and calculated. He told Eleanor that she was being dramatic and that plenty of people her age lived in assisted living facilities and were perfectly happy. When Eleanor began to cry, Michael told her that her emotional manipulation wouldn't work on him and that she needed to grow up and accept reality. Eleanor hung up the phone that day knowing that her relationship with her son was effectively over. Michael had made it clear that he viewed her as a burden and that he had no intention of being actively involved in her care or her life. Eleanor spent the next several weeks in the hospital recovering from her surgery and thinking about what she wanted to do with the rest of her life. She realized that she had been holding on to hope that Michael would eventually come around and want to have a closer relationship with her. But his behavior during her health crisis had shown her who he really was. When Eleanor was discharged from the hospital, she made the decision to move into Sunset Manor, a modest nursing home that accepted patients on Medicare. She could have afforded to live anywhere she wanted with her secret wealth, but Eleanor chose to live simply and save her money for a different purpose. She told the staff at Sunset Manor that she was a retired factory worker living on Social Security, and everyone assumed she was just another elderly woman with limited means. Eleanor was comfortable with people underestimating her financial situation because it allowed her to observe how they treated someone they perceived as having no money or power. Eleanor quickly became friends with Maria Santos, a cleaning lady at the nursing home who worked multiple jobs to support her own family. Maria reminded Eleanor of herself when she was younger, working tirelessly to provide for her loved ones without complaint or self-pity. Eleanor watched Maria interact with all the residents with kindness and dignity, regardless of whether they were pleasant to her or difficult. Maria would sit with residents who had no visitors, help them write letters to family members who never responded, and always had a smile and encouraging word for everyone she met. As Eleanor settled into life at Sunset Manor, she began to formulate a plan for her wealth that felt more meaningful than simply leaving it to Michael. She researched charities that helped working mothers, organizations that provided scholarships to first-generation college students, and programs that assisted elderly people who had been abandoned by their families. Eleanor also began to think about the people in her daily life who showed genuine kindness and compassion, particularly Maria, who had become like a daughter to her in ways that Michael had never been. Eleanor contacted her attorney and asked him to visit her at the nursing home to update her will. She explained that she wanted to make some changes to how her estate would be distributed after her death. The attorney was surprised to learn about Eleanor's substantial wealth, as she had been very secretive about her finances over the years. Eleanor showed him documentation for her safety deposit boxes and provided him with detailed records of her gold coin purchases dating back 40 years. The attorney estimated that Eleanor's collection was worth approximately $2.3 million, making her a very wealthy woman despite her modest lifestyle. Over the next year, Eleanor refined her estate planning with the help of her attorney. She decided to leave small amounts of money to several charities that were important to her, but the bulk of her wealth would go to the people who had shown her kindness during her time at Sunset Manor. Maria would receive $500,000, enough to pay off her mortgage and send her children to college. The nursing home itself would receive $300,000 to improve patient care and facilities. Eleanor also decided to leave money to several other staff members who had been particularly kind to her, including a nurse who always took extra time to listen to residents and a maintenance worker who went out of his way to fix things in residents' rooms quickly. Eleanor's health began to decline in early 2019, but she remained mentally sharp and continued to work with her attorney to finalize her estate planning. She wrote detailed letters to each of the people who would benefit from her will, explaining why she had chosen them and what she hoped they would do with the money. Eleanor also wrote a letter to Michael, not to be delivered until after her death, in which she explained her decision to exclude him from her inheritance and the reasons behind that choice. The letter was both heartbreaking and brutally honest about how Michael's treatment of her had affected her in her final years. In March 2019, Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 84. The staff at Sunset Manor were saddened by her death because she had been well liked by everyone who knew her there. Maria was particularly devastated because Eleanor had become like family to her, and they had spent countless hours talking about their lives and their families. Michael received a call from the nursing home informing him of his mother's death, and he arranged for a simple funeral service without notifying any of Eleanor's former neighbors or friends. Michael assumed that his mother had died with very little money, as she had been living in a modest nursing home and had never mentioned having any significant assets. He expected that her estate would consist of her personal belongings and perhaps a small savings account that might cover her funeral expenses. Michael was not particularly emotional about his mother's death, viewing it more as a final resolution to what he had seen as an ongoing obligation to check on her welfare. He had no idea that Eleanor had been documenting his neglect for years and planning her revenge. 3 months after Eleanor's funeral, Michael received a phone call that would change his understanding of everything he thought he knew about his mother. The call came from First National Bank, where Eleanor had maintained one of her safety deposit boxes. The bank representative explained that the annual fee for Eleanor's safety deposit box was overdue, and that as her next of kin, Michael needed to either pay the fee or arrange to have the contents of the box removed. Michael was confused because he didn't know his mother had a safety deposit box, but he agreed to meet with the bank representative to handle the matter. When Michael arrived at the bank, he was escorted to the vault area where the safety deposit boxes were located. The bank representative explained that Eleanor had actually maintained 3 different safety deposit boxes at 3 different banks, and that all of them were now his responsibility as her heir. Michael was puzzled by this information because it didn't fit with his understanding of his mother's financial situation. He had always believed that Eleanor lived paycheck to paycheck on her Social Security benefits and had no significant assets or savings. The first safety deposit box that Michael opened contained approximately 800 gold coins of various denominations and years, along with detailed records of every purchase Eleanor had made. Michael stared at the contents in complete shock, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. The bank representative explained that based on current gold prices, the contents of that single box were worth approximately $600,000. Michael's hands shook as he processed this information, realizing that his mother had been secretly wealthy while he had treated her as a financial burden. The second safety deposit box contained even more gold coins, along with rare silver dollars and collectible pieces that Eleanor had acquired over the years. The bank representative estimated that the contents of the second box were worth approximately $800,000. Michael was becoming increasingly agitated as he realized the magnitude of his mother's hidden wealth and what it meant about his treatment of her during her final years. He demanded to know if there were any other assets he should be aware of, and the bank representative mentioned the third safety deposit box at another bank across town. The third safety deposit box contained the remainder of Eleanor's gold coin collection, along with detailed documentation of every interaction she had with Michael during her final years. Eleanor had kept meticulous records of every phone call, every visit, and every conversation in which Michael had made it clear that he viewed her as a burden. She had also included newspaper clippings about elder abuse and abandonment, along with articles about children who had abandoned their aging parents. The documentation painted a clear picture of Michael's neglect and indifference toward his mother's emotional and physical needs. Along with the gold coins and documentation, Michael found a sealed envelope with his name written on it in his mother's handwriting. Inside the envelope was a letter that Eleanor had written shortly before her death, explaining her decision to disinherit Michael and the reasons behind that choice. The letter was several pages long and detailed every instance in which Michael had disappointed or hurt Eleanor during her final years. Eleanor wrote about how she had worked 3 jobs to put Michael through college, how she had sacrificed her own comfort and happiness to give him opportunities, and how he had repaid her sacrifices with indifference and neglect. The letter explained that Eleanor had been testing Michael during her final years, giving him opportunities to show that he cared about her as a person, rather than viewing her as an obligation. Eleanor wrote that she had hoped Michael would surprise her by visiting more often, calling more frequently, or showing genuine interest in her well-being. Instead, Michael had consistently chosen his business interests and social obligations over spending time with his aging mother. Eleanor's letter made it clear that she had been deeply hurt by Michael's behavior and that she had lost respect for the man he had become. Eleanor's letter concluded with the revelation that Michael would not be inheriting any of her wealth, because she had decided to leave her fortune to people who had shown genuine kindness and compassion. She explained that Maria Santos, who had treated Eleanor with dignity and respect, despite having no expectation of financial gain, would be receiving $500,000. The nursing home staff who had cared for Eleanor with genuine warmth and professionalism would also benefit from her estate. Eleanor wrote that she hoped Michael would understand that wealth was not just about money, but about the love and respect that people earned through their actions. Michael was devastated by his mother's letter, and the realization that he had lost a multi-million-dollar inheritance through his own callousness and neglect. He immediately contacted an attorney to explore whether he could contest his mother's will, but he quickly learned that Eleanor had been very thorough in her estate planning. She had documented his abandonment extensively, had multiple witnesses to his behavior, and had been mentally competent when she made her final will. The attorney explained that Michael had virtually no chance of successfully challenging the will, especially given the detailed evidence Eleanor had compiled about his neglect. The reading of Eleanor's will took place 6 months after her death, and Michael was forced to sit in a room with the people his mother had chosen to benefit from her estate. Maria Santos was shocked to learn that the quiet, modest woman she had befriended was actually a multi-millionaire who had been living simply by choice. The nursing home administrator was moved to tears when she learned that Eleanor had left money specifically for improving patient care and facilities. Several staff members who had been kind to Eleanor received smaller bequests that were still substantial enough to change their lives significantly. Michael received exactly $1 from his mother's estate, along with a note explaining that this nominal bequest was included so that no one could claim that Eleanor had simply forgotten about her son. The note stated that Eleanor had not forgotten Michael, but had made a conscious decision to exclude him from her wealth because of his treatment of her during her final years. The dollar that Michael inherited was a final insult that made it clear his mother had deliberately chosen to give her fortune to strangers rather than to her own son. The aftermath of Eleanor's death and the revelation of her secret wealth became a source of community discussion and media attention. Local news outlets picked up the story of the modest nursing home resident who had secretly been a millionaire and had left her fortune to the people who had shown her kindness in her final years. Michael found himself portrayed as the ungrateful son who had abandoned his mother and lost millions of dollars as a result of his callousness. The public reaction was overwhelmingly supportive of Eleanor's decision and critical of Michael's behavior. Maria Santos used her inheritance to pay off her mortgage and establish college funds for her 3 children, ensuring that they would have opportunities for higher education that she had never been able to provide before. She also used some of the money to start a small business helping other elderly people with household tasks and companionship, inspired by her friendship with Eleanor and the kindness Eleanor had shown her. The nursing home used Eleanor's bequest to renovate patient rooms, hire additional staff, and create a fund to help residents who couldn't afford certain amenities or activities. Michael's life was permanently changed by the loss of his mother's inheritance and the public scrutiny that followed. His business suffered as clients and colleagues learned about his treatment of Eleanor, and several professional relationships were damaged by the negative publicity. Michael's marriage also suffered strain as his wife struggled with the embarrassment of being associated with someone who had been portrayed in the media as heartlessly abandoning his elderly mother. The financial impact of losing a multi-million-dollar inheritance was significant, but the damage to Michael's reputation and relationships was perhaps even more devastating. In the years following Eleanor's death, Michael attempted to rebuild his life and reputation, but the story of his mother's revenge continued to follow him. He moved to a different city and tried to start over professionally, but the internet had preserved the news stories about Eleanor's will and Michael's role in the family drama. Potential clients and business partners would often discover the story during background research, making it difficult for Michael to establish new professional relationships. The lesson Eleanor had intended to teach her son about the consequences of his actions continued to impact his life long after her death. Eleanor Mitchell's story became a cautionary tale about the importance of maintaining family relationships and treating elderly parents with dignity and respect. Her decision to leave her fortune to people who had shown her genuine kindness rather than to her biological son who had abandoned her resonated with many people who had experienced similar family dynamics. The story raised questions about inheritance expectations, family obligations, and the true meaning of wealth that extended far beyond the monetary value of Eleanor's gold coin collection. The legacy of Eleanor's secret wealth and her final act of justice serves as a reminder that our actions toward others, especially our most vulnerable family members, have consequences that extend far beyond what we might anticipate. Eleanor's transformation from a struggling single mother to a secret millionaire who used her wealth to reward kindness and punish neglect became a powerful story about the choices we make and the values we demonstrate through our treatment of others. Michael learned too late that the most valuable inheritance his mother could have given him was not her money, but her love and respect, and that by the time he realized what he had lost, it was far too late to recover it. So, what would you have done in Eleanor's shoes? Would you have left the fortune to your son, or to the people who were actually there for you when it mattered most? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your take. And if this story touched your heart, or made you think twice about the meaning of family, loyalty, and kindness, then make sure to hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful, thought-provoking stories just like this one. We upload new stories every single day, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the people who show up for you aren't the ones you expected.